So we're going to go through a lot of the, actually, this is all published data. So we're looking at just published information on integrative cancer treatments. Now, supposedly there's not supposed to be so much evidence, but we're going to spend the next 3 hours going over it. Now, the first thing, I guess, is why do we even care? Why do we even care about doing integrative cancer treatments? Maybe our treatments are good enough with the conventional stuff that we don't even need to be looking at this. So we'll start off just by going through what's the current situation right now in the cancer world. This is just some statistics looking at the change in the deaths from cancer. So looking at 100 years before, we're looking at 3% of people dying from cancer. By the year 2000, they're 24%. So there's been a fairly dramatic increase. In certain age groups, this has actually even gone past the death rate for heart disease and become the #1 cause. And this includes childhood cancers. So it's not, just because we're living longer, so we have more cancers. It's even in children, it's going up the same way. And this is just some statistics with breast cancer, essentially showing the same thing. Between 1975 and 1994, over the 20-year period, cancer in women has been increasing by 1.6% per year. Every year it's been increasing. This has not stopped. The curve is still going the same. It's still increasing every year. Then pretty much the same thing for men. This is one particular one looking at Chinese women and breast cancer. Traditionally in China, breast cancer is pretty low. And here we're seeing it as between 40 and 60 per 100,000. When you look at it, the Americans, and again, this just shows that it's not the genes that are doing it, because when the Chinese women move to North America, we see the breast cancer rates increase the same way as the Americans. Now this was a controversial paper. It was a good paper. It was actually not done by an oncologist. It was done by an epidemiologist, by a statistician. And here he was just looking at very simple bottom line. He said, what's the death rate from cancer? So he wasn't looking at, are we getting partial responses? Are we getting, some reduction in tumor size? It was just very black and white. Are they alive or dead? So looking over a 30-year period here, he showed that there was both increases in the incidence and the death rate from cancers. And then a follow-up paper 10 years later, showed the same thing. You're just showing that it's continuing the same way. And that's interesting too, is that when they looked at cancers that were actually declining, they're actually improving the statistics, it was mostly in a few specific cancers, including cancer of the cervix and the colon. Now it seems primarily because with those two cancers, we actually have a test for a precancerous lesion. So you're able to, with pap smears, you can detect cells before they become cancer. With colon cancer, you can detect polyps, years before they become cancer. So if you can pick them up before they're cancer, you can actually have some prevention. Early detection, which is detecting it early on after it's already cancer, hasn't been showing such good results. We're not really changing much with early detection, but if you have a pre-cancer detection, then you can have a good effect. And the only other cancer that was improving was lung cancer, not because of our great medical treatments, but just because people were smoking less. This was another paper when it came out, stirred up a lot of controversy. This was done by a group of oncologists in Australia. And this one, it was a large study, it was a large review. And here they were looking at the change in 5-year survival based on chemotherapy. So they're looking how much has since the introduction of chemotherapy, how much have we improved the 5-year survival in cancer? And their conclusion is that, this is in adults, they're not looking at children, but in adults, they said they improved the 5-year survival by 2.3% in Australia and 2.1% in the United States. So they said there's a fairly minor, increase in the survival based on, all of this, sort of massive chemotherapy programs that we developed. And even with that, even the statistic is primarily in a few cancers. You're seeing, like with Hodgkin's disease, testicular cancer, we've seen some good responses with chemotherapy. Most of the others, we haven't really seen much change in 5-year survival. What we have seen is some changes in short-term survival. So people, going from, surviving a year to surviving 13 months. So there's been some modest increases, but in terms of the actual 5-year, we haven't changed it much. I'm just going to go through some other statistics in terms of the connection of nutrition, of vitamins to the incidence of cancer. This is one large one done in Europe. And here they were just looking at 3 vitamins, 3 particular ones, vitamin B6, folate, or the amino acid methionine. And this one they found that if you had good levels of any one of them, that you had 50% reduction in lung cancer. If you had good levels of all of them, then it was even better. But just showing, boosting, just certain nutrients can have a dramatic difference in the incidence of cancer. And this you have to be aware of, because there's a lot of these nutritional studies that come up that can be misleading. This one got a lot of press when it came out. This one called Dietary Supplements and Mortality Rate in Older Women. And again, this was a retrospective, it was an epidemiological study. So they were just looking at statistics. And their conclusion that got spread all over the world was that multivitamins increased deaths in older women. And then when this came out, the story came out, it was covered by all the news media. People all over the world stopped taking their one-a-day multivitamin because they figured it was going to kill them. So let's look at what actually happened in the study, though. When you actually dissected it, these kind of numbers came out. The people that took a B-complex vitamins, they had a 7% decrease in mortality. If they took vitamin C, they had a 4% decrease. If they took vitamin D, they had an 8% decrease. These pieces showing that it was decreasing mortality, and they came up with this conclusion that a multivitamin was going to increase it. So how did this happen? Now, fortunately, we had another large study. This one done in Europe. The previous one was in the States. So this one, just a year later, is another large study looking at the effect of supplements on death rate, including cancer mortality. So again, it's a large study. And in this one, they had a conclusion that baseline users of antioxidant supplements had a significantly reduced risk of cancer mortality. Again, almost half the risk. So this means that baseline users mean that these were people taking the vitamins right from the beginning of the study. And so if they were on the vitamins right at the start, they reduced their cancer death rate by half. And they reduced the all-causes, not just cancer, but all-cause mortality by 42% compared to people not taking any supplements. But there was this other group that was in there that they separated out. So there was this group that said non-users at baseline who started supplements during the follow-up period had an increased risk of cancer and all-cause mortality. So what does this mean? Is that there are people who were not taking vitamins at the beginning. Somewhere during the course of the study, they started taking them. And then they found that in that group, there was actually an increased death rate. This is similar to what was in the previous study. When they actually looked at it, is that you started taking vitamins during the study, somehow that increased the death rate. So what did that mean? These are just correlations. These are not cause and effect studies. So the correlation, though, was what the author said at the bottom here, was that there's something called a sick user effect, which means that people were starting to take the vitamins during the study, not just because they wanted to be healthy, but because they were already diagnosed with a serious illness. And they were starting the vitamins to help to deal with their illness. So it wasn't that the vitamins were causing them to be sick, it was the sickness that was causing them to take vitamins. But when you're doing correlations, they don't have that distinction. So I said it's something to watch for because there's a lot of it's a kind of manipulation of statistics, especially in nutrition studies. Now this one was actually a randomized, prospective, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. So this was like a gold standard type of clinical trial. It was done with male doctors, 14,600 male doctors 50 years and older. And this one they were looking again at a cancer prevention study. And what they did is they gave them either which was a fairly low dose 1-a-day multivitamin, or a placebo, and they looked at what happened. And here they said the ones taking the multivitamin had an 8% reduction in cancer. Now it's interesting when this came up. I mean, this was statistically significant. It was a real change. In fact, if this was a new drug that was doing this, it would have been big news all over the world that we're preventing cancer. But it was a multivitamin. And so they said, well, 8%, the comments were starting to come back. It's not so great, could be better, so let's not pay much attention to this. In fact, they said that what they used, again, was very low dose. And generally speaking, if you would have used better doses, the likelihood is we would have seen much better reduction. But even with a minimal dose, it had an effect. Another study using in bladder cancer. Now this was not a prevention study of cancer, it was looking at relapse of the cancer. So these were people with bladder cancer that had the conventional treatment, and then they split them into two groups, one that got either like a low dose multivitamin, or they got the multivitamin plus significant doses of vitamin A, B6, vitamin C, vitamin E, and zinc. So some of these important, if you want, anti-cancer type vitamins, they gave at real doses. And after 10 months, they said 80% of the multivitamin group had relapsed already. And if they took the multivitamin plus the high dose supplements, it was down to 40% relapse. So they cut the relapse rate in half by adding more significant doses of vitamins. Okay, this one is looking at prevention of breast cancer. And this one, they're looking at, against a fair number. It's looking at over 2,000 cases at 2,000 controls over a period of 10 years. And their conclusion is that the breast cancer risk in premenopausal women was reduced by 54% in women using zinc. And in postmenopausal, where there is more breast cancer, they're able to reduce the risk by 26% with a multivitamin, 42% with beta carotene, 21% with vitamin C, 25% with vitamin E. And in postmenopausal, it looks like the winner again is zinc. So zinc seems to be a mineral that's very important in terms of prevention of breast cancer. This is a review paper that was done on vitamin D for cancer prevention. And here they reviewed a number of observational studies, and they only had one clinical trial. You don't get a lot of clinical trials, done on nutrients. There's issues with funding and who's going to pay for it. But here, the review of what they had was that their conclusion was they expected that if you raise your vitamin D levels to between 40 and 60, it reduced the fatality rate of patients with breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and prostate cancer in half. Now, to get to 40 to 60, and by the way, in this country, probably on average, most people are running around 20 for their vitamin D levels, or even much lower. Well, almost everyone is low. The normal range technically starts around 30. So almost everyone is now low in vitamin D, but even at 30, they found that if you got over 40, you got better protection against cancer. So what do you need to do to get your levels? If you're going to supplement, you generally need between 4,000 and 5,000 units of vitamin D a day to get to the 40 range. What they sell here most often is 400. 400. If you're starting around 20, 400 might get you to 21. It's not going to get you anywhere close to the levels that we need. So to get a real effect, again, you really need to get to around 4,000 to 5,000 units, which sounds high. I mean, a lot of people look at that and say, wow, it sounds like so much vitamin D. But one way to get an idea of what's high is to look at what's normal. So if we look at what's normal 100 years ago, it was normal to be out in the sun, to work in the sun, to walk in the sun. We got a lot of sun exposure. And the estimation is that, especially in the summer and the midday, within about 20 minutes, your skin will produce about 15,000 units. So it's normal for our body to be producing about 15,000 units through the spring, summer, early fall. But somehow they came up with an RDA of 600. This was kind of just an interesting paper that was looking at people that had what they called spontaneous regression. So they said, sometimes cancer just goes away, just disappears by itself. So here they decided to look at them. So they looked at 200 people who reported this spontaneous regression. And when they started questioning them, they said, well, 87% of them made major dietary changes, 65% were using nutritional supplements, 55% were detoxifying. So these cancers didn't look like they just went away. These people worked really hard for them to just go away. Okay, and now we're looking at again another breast cancer study. And these are women, though, who already were diagnosed with breast cancer and getting the conventional treatment. So in this one, they're looking at women just getting conventional cancer treatment with or without nutritional supplements, and starting within the first 6 months after they were diagnosed. So they had almost 5,000 women with breast cancer, and their conclusion was that women who were taking vitamin C, vitamin E, or multivitamins reduced their risk of death by 18%, and they reduced their risk of the cancer coming back by 22%. So in terms of survival and preventing recurrences, you can make some significant differences just by, in this case, adding some modest supplements. Another breast cancer study, again with women who already were diagnosed with breast cancer. And this one they saw women who were taking multivitamins and minerals before they were diagnosed. They were already on supplements, even before, and they continued them through their whole treatment. So in this case, they had 31% less likely to have a recurrence and 47% less likely to die of their breast cancer. So again, you're almost cutting the risk of dying of your cancer in half with the supplements. And even 27% less likely to die of any cause. Now, there are some of the women who are only taking the vitamins without the minerals who didn't get such good results. And that would make sense if we looked at some of the other statistics where you see things like zinc, which can have dramatic effects on breast cancer. So you need the whole blend. You need the vitamins, but it's critical to also get the minerals in. Another study looking at gastric cancer, stomach cancer, both the incidence and death rate from that. And this one was, again, it was a randomized control trial. This was a standard clinical trial. And this time they had what they called their vitamin treatment. The vitamin treatment just consisted of vitamin C, vitamin E, and selenium. So when they just added, it's again a modest supplementation, again they reduced the deaths from stomach cancer by 50% and esophagus cancer. This was another small, it seems pretty unknown clinical trial, but with important results. This one was done with lung cancer patients. Lung cancer is notorious for poor survival and even not great responses to treatment. This was only 18 patients with small cell lung cancer who all got the standard treatments. And then they added a multiple high-dose vitamin mineral supplement. Actually, when I went into the paper to look at it, at exactly what they were given, it was a really comprehensive supplementation. They were giving pretty much all the vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, a very comprehensive supplement, and at good doses. So this is it's a real supplement. Generally speaking, that the statistics were that they were expected to survive at 30 months. You only expect 1% of them to still be alive. And in this case, 40% of them were still alive at 6 years, which is almost unknown. Now again, it wasn't large numbers, but that still, with that amount of difference, it was still significant. And the numbers were better for people who started the vitamins even earlier in the course. This is another lung cancer study, a smaller study, and in this case, they weren't using the kind of comprehensive supplement they did in the other one. They were only using vitamin C, vitamin E, and beta carotene. And in this one, the results were that with chemotherapy alone, the survival at 1 year was about 33%. If they added the antioxidants, it went up to 37%. So again, here we're seeing that there was a benefit. It wasn't dramatic like the last one, but in this case, they were only using, again, very modest supplementation. And it's really that, if you're using a little bit, you get a little bit of benefit, and when they use more, they got more benefit. And this is one of the things there's a basic laboratory study, but it helps to explain why this occurs. So this was just a study done with rats, and they used a carcinogen, a powerful one that gives cancer 100% of the time to the rats. And then they added various nutrients. So they were using just selenium, magnesium, vitamin C, and vitamin A. They're using 4 different things. But here they used them either singly or they used them in combinations. So if they're using just one nutrient, they already got about a 50% decrease in cancer. If they used 2 together, it increased it to 70%. If they used 3, 80%. If they used all 4 together, they prevented most of the cancers from developing. There's another similar thing, just looking at synergy. They found that vitamins C and another one called K3, each one of them have been shown to have anti-cancer effects on breast cancer cell lines. But if you put the 2 together, then you can get the anti-cancer effect at between 10 and 50 times lower doses. So again, the synergy between them is very important. And then we have this study. So after all of these great studies showing how you can be preventing cancer, improving survival with supplements, this study came out. We called the effect of vitamin E and beta carotene on the incidence of lung cancer and other cancers in male smokers. Okay, so here they took a group of smokers, a large group, 29,000, and they put them on either vitamin E, alpha tocopherol, or beta carotene. Not at great doses. It was actually kind of fairly low doses. And they looked at what happened with the lung cancer. They said the ones taking the vitamin E, there seemed to be no change in the lung cancer. The ones who were taking the beta carotene showed an increase in lung cancer when they were taking beta carotene. Now, just so you know, when this study was started, when it was going on, there were already people who were more knowledgeable in nutritional medicine who were saying, don't do this study, it's not going to work. The way you're doing it, it's not going to work. But they did it. They did it anyways. So why would this happen? Why would taking an antioxidant increase the chance of cancer? And we had, before they did this study, there was like over 200 studies showing that diets high in antioxidants, fruits, vegetables, had lower cancer risk. They had 11 studies alone showing that beta carotene was protective against lung cancer, but this other study showed that it wasn't. Now, what it seems is going on with this is that there's other research. I'm going to go into a little more of it now, showing that if you use isolated antioxidants, you use one antioxidant by itself, and again, especially if it's in sort of fairly modest doses, in a high free radical environment. So you take one antioxidant, put it in a bunch of free radicals, it does what it's supposed to do, which is to neutralize a free radical, but in the process it becomes one. And sometimes it becomes an even more aggressive free radical than the one it just neutralized. What's supposed to happen is that we have a whole team of antioxidants and it gets passed on from one to the next until it's eliminated. If you don't have the team, then you end up building up these intermediate free radicals, which can actually make things worse. But the way most studies are done is they like to isolate things and only use one thing at a time. Which, again, when you're using antioxidants, you can't do that. This is another one. This was a clinical trial of people who already had cancer. These were head and neck cancer patients. And this one, they treated them with the standard radiation, or they had the radiation plus either vitamin E or beta carotene. Again, the same stuff they used in the other trial. They actually, I don't remember why, the beta carotene arm of it was even discontinued, and they only continued with the vitamin E. Again, at a fairly low dose of 400 units. And what happened here is that they said after, there was a 40% higher early recurrence of the cancer if they were taking the vitamin. When they looked at the long term, though, when they looked down the road at 8 years, there was no difference. So it seemed, though, that this vitamin just caused the recurrence to happen a little bit earlier. So again, why would this happen? Now, it's interesting that a year later, the same group published another paper in the same journal. Most oncologists know about this one, but they don't seem to know about the second one. So the second one, oops. Okay, so in the second one, they actually broke down the data a little more, and they came up with a very different conclusion. They said the increased early recurrence only occurred in patients who were continuing to smoke during their radiation treatments. So this is like, if they weren't smoking during the radiation treatments, there was no increase in this early recurrence. And in fact, all they really saw was that there was much less toxicity to the healthy tissue from the radiation treatments. It was actually protecting, the healthy tissue without any early recurrence. So again, we're seeing the same thing happening here. If you take a single sort of modest antioxidant and stick it in this high free radical environment of smokers, you're creating worse free radicals and actually making the situation worse. Unfortunately, the conclusions with a lot of this was, don't smoke during your radiation. Their conclusion was don't take vitamins during your radiation. And then just some laboratory stuff that supports the same idea. This is one of the leading research in looking at antioxidants in cancer. And he said, his conclusion was laboratory data show that antioxidants protect cancer cells when administered one at a time at low doses, the way that these other clinical trials were done. what happens when you use better doses in combination. So here, a mixture of vitamin A, vitamin E succinate. By the way, when they used vitamin E in the last clinical trial, they used what they call vitamin E acetate, which is a synthetic vitamin E. What this researcher found was that vitamin E acetate did not have any protection against cancer, but the succinate, the natural form, did. Unfortunately, his data was already out before they did that other clinical trial, but they still went with the synthetic form. So even the single vitamin that they were using, they were even using the wrong form of it in the trial. But anyhow, if you use vitamin A, vitamin E succinate, vitamin C, and mixture of carotenoids, not beta-carotene by itself, in human melanoma cells in a culture, and these are, when they use them in doses that individually would have no effect on the cancer, when they use them in combination, they did reduce the growth of the cancer cells. So again, there's the synergy between these things. And then when they, in the same mixture, all they did was double the dose of the vitamin C, and that reduced the proliferation by about 90%. It stopped a lot of the growth of the cancer, even just by giving better doses of them. Another one of his experiments was using vitamin E and beta-carotene at high doses, given with radiation, and then they found that, so they had the combination again of radiation plus these two vitamins. In combination, they produced a 90% cure rate in mice with transplanted cancer, whereas if they used radiation by itself or the antioxidant by itself, it didn't do much of anything. So you went from no effect to a 90% effect by the synergy between the treatments. Okay, this one is actually a review paper. It's done by a radiation oncologist. And in here they looked at 280 studies looking at using antioxidants with conventional treatments. 50 of them were human clinical trials. And they were different designs. They were using different nutrients in combination with different treatments. But the conclusion was that they enhance the killing of the therapeutic modalities and decrease their side effects and protect normal tissue. So the concern that the vitamins are going to interfere with the standard treatments, they said they can't find any data to support that. In fact, if anything, it shows the opposite. When you add the antioxidants, it improves the effect of the chemotherapy and radiation and decreases the damage to the healthy tissue. There's another review paper done by another oncologist, essentially with the same conclusion. He was a little more restrictive though. He only took 19 clinical trials meeting very strict criteria. And again, he said none of the trials reported evidence of decreases in efficacy from adding the antioxidants during chemotherapy. Many studies showed increased survival times, increased tumor responses, or both, as well as fewer toxicities. So again, we had two review papers, again, both of them really coming to the same conclusions, that by adding the nutrients, you can improve results and decrease damage. And these are just some of those studies that they were using to show this. This is one with using glutathione with oxaliplatin chemotherapy for colon cancer. They found with neuropathy, which is a common side effect of the platinum drugs, they reduced it from 42% to 27% if they added just glutathione. This one is looking at vitamin E and protecting the toxicity of platinum drugs. And here they said more than 85% in the platinum group developed neuropathy, and that was reduced to 31% by adding vitamin E. And also, even with the neuropathy, if they did get it on the vitamin E, it was less severe. And then there was, again, a whole range of other clinical trials, again, all showing essentially the same thing, that when you added the antioxidants, there was decreased neurotoxicity, heart damage, lung damage, mucositis, bone marrow, and again, no trials that showed any interference with the treatments. these are some case reports. In this one, they had 2 cases of ovarian cancer, stage 3 of cancer. Ovarian cancer is known not to do very well. They may get initial responses to chemotherapy. They relapse very quickly, generally. So this one, they had 2 ovarian cancer patients. They had the standard chemotherapy. They were taking oral antioxidants, and they added intravenous vitamin C twice a week. And in the 2 patients, after 3 years, they showed no evidence of recurrence of relapse. So again, that's very exceptional for that to happen. This is another paper looking at 3 cases. In this case, they didn't do any of the standard therapy. They declined it. These were 3 patients who didn't want it. But they only got intravenous vitamin C and supplements. And in these 3 cases that they published, they showed like unexpected long survival times, and one of them looked like he was actually cured. By the way, this one was published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, which is it's a pretty conservative journal. I mean, for them to publish it, it had to be, sort of very detailed, documented. This is another, intravenous vitamin C clinical trial. Again, this one's just looking at dealing with the toxicity of the chemotherapy. So they had 125 breast cancer patients, all of them receiving standard care. Almost half of them received intravenous vitamin C for at least 4 weeks. And the results of this one was adding the intravenous vitamin C resulted in significant reduction in most of the chemotherapy side effects of nausea, loss of appetite, fatigue, depression, sleep disorders, dizziness, bleeding. All of the common side effects of chemo were significantly reduced when they added the vitamin C. Okay, and then we get these kind of studies. Again, this was a laboratory study, it wasn't a clinical trial, but the title was pretty dramatic. And again, it went out to oncologists all over the world. It says, vitamin C antagonizes the cytotoxic effects of anti-neoplastic drugs. Now, it says that it's a pretty dramatic title. Now, first of all, you might think that a study with a title like vitamin C antagonizes, that, again, most people think that they were testing vitamin C. Not exactly true. What they were testing was something called dehydroascorbic acid, which is actually an oxidized form of vitamin C. When we're using vitamin C as treatments, if it gets oxidized, we throw it away. We don't use it. But in this case, that's what they tested, was oxidized vitamin C. And what their conclusion is that when they tested it, again, it was in a laboratory study, against various chemotherapy drugs, they showed a decrease in the cytotoxicity of all the drugs they tested. So again, this went out, as you said, here we're showing that the vitamin C is going to interfere with chemotherapy. Again, this was just laboratory. Most of the time, doctors don't even pay much attention to a laboratory study. It's not a clinical trial. But because of the title of this, it got a lot of attention. So you might say, so what does it make any difference? So they used oxidized vitamin C. Regular vitamin C, does it make any difference? Fortunately, a few years later, we had another study that was done, this time by the Germans. And here they tested both. They tested oxidized dehydroascorbate and regular vitamin C. And their conclusion is that there was a difference in different ways. First of all, they said that just directly the effect of vitamin C has a direct effect on the cancer cells. That they're showing that the vitamin C, and you see the bottom. So vitamin C by itself can inhibit the growth of the cancer cells, not the dehydroascorbate. And it happens in different ways. First of all, it can induce apoptosis. It has an anti-proliferative effect, causing cell cycle arrest. So they even looked at different mechanisms of how the vitamin C by itself was affecting cancer. And in theirs, when they tested it in combination with different chemotherapy drugs, they found that For some of them, it improved the effect of the chemotherapy drugs, and some it had a neutral effect. It just didn't seem to make any difference at all. But using regular vitamin C did not interfere with any of the effect the way the previous study showed. But again, it seems that the first study was widely distributed. The second one seems to be unknown. This was another vitamin C and breast cancer study. And this was, again, just a meta-analysis. It was just a review of 10 prospective studies using either vitamin C supplement or not even a supplement, but just increasing the dietary sources of vitamin C. This is after they've been diagnosed with breast cancer. So the results were that taking a vitamin C supplement decreased the total deaths by 19%. And if they got it from diet, it worked even better, which makes sense because when you're getting it from diet, you're getting vitamin C combined with probably thousands of other antioxidants that it's working with. Now, based on those two case studies of the ovarian cancer where they got these dramatic results, they actually did get approval to run a clinical trial. So they did a clinical trial here using oral antioxidants, intravenous vitamin C, or placebo. It was actually a double-blind clinical trial, together with the standard chemotherapy treatment. In this study, mostly they were reporting on the toxicity of the chemotherapy. When they first did the mouse studies, they showed it there that it reduced the toxicity of chemotherapy in normal cells. They also showed that chemotherapy, together with vitamin C, at least when they did the animal studies, was synergistic in inhibiting ovarian cancer. So like that previous study, those case reports where they showed the dramatic decrease in the recurrence in the women doing the combination, in the mouse model it also showed the same thing. You put the two together, you get a much stronger effect. But when they did it in the women, they were only able to report on the toxicity. They didn't have enough numbers of the patients to be able to report on the decreased mortality. But at least they showed there was, again, quite a dramatic decrease in the toxicity of the chemotherapy. So there was decreased damage to liver, kidney, spleen. This is just an interesting case, but it has more to do with the whole use of what they're calling evidence-based medicine now. Evidence-based medicine, initially, the foundation of it, it was supposed to be able to give more information to a doctor so that they can make better decisions on how to treat patients. Unfortunately, it mostly doesn't get used that way anymore. Instead of giving more information to the doctor to make decisions, they're using the term evidence-based medicine to dictate the treatment to the doctor, saying, you must do this because this is what we said the evidence is, rather than, again, just giving the information. And a lot of stuff is dismissed that way too. They'll say, well, we're not going to use that because there's no evidence. Even if there is, as long as you say there's no evidence, you can dismiss a treatment. So this is just an example of an incident that happened. This was in 2010. This was all over the internet, all over the world, this story, about a man in New Zealand who was sick with the swine flu. He was in a coma. He was dying. And the family was starting to read about it. They just they had nothing to do for him. But they didn't accept that, and they started reading of what they could do. And they came across intravenous vitamin C as a treatment for viruses. So they came to the doctors at the hospital and said, can you give him intravenous vitamin C? Their response was no, we won't do it. It's not scientific. There's no evidence, and we won't give it. Now the family didn't accept that either, and they actually went to court. And the judge said, give him the vitamin C. I mean, you're not going to hurt him. You're expecting him to die in a few days. So they did. They reluctantly gave it to him, and he made a full recovery. Again, the response is that, well, it's just coincidence that it happened after we gave the vitamin C. It had, because there's no evidence, therefore it couldn't have been vitamin C. Now, before this case came out, there's a manual called The Guidelines for the Provision and Assessment of Nutrition Support Therapy in the Critically Ill Patient. So this is a manual for like intensive care doctors on what treatments to use. This one came out in 2009. And in the manual, their recommendation is that high-dose intravenous antioxidant therapy should be given to all critically ill patients. And they said, based on a systematic review of studies, which included the use of intravenous vitamin C 1 gram every 8 hours, and other antioxidants showing improved clinical outcomes in critically ill patients. So presumably in their own manual of evidence-based medicine, it says to give it. But their response is there is no evidence. And again, I think it was mostly just being used as a way of dismissing a treatment that they weren't familiar with and didn't want to use. So if you just say there's no evidence, we don't have to do it. Even if there is, even if there's substantial.
Mel, is this a good time for a break?
Let me just, 2 more slides. This is another very recent vitamin C, intravenous vitamin C clinical trial. Small clinical trial where and this one was only in patients with what would be called terminal cancer. So these are patients who had received chemoradiation, whatever treatments, conventional treatments. They were non-responsive at this point, and their doctors assessed them that they expected them not to respond to any further chemotherapy. They're considered multi-drug resistant. They said, we wouldn't even give anything else. So they took these patients and they gave them intravenous vitamin C together with a chemotherapy that they thought might have, some chance otherwise. And the results is that half the patients didn't show any benefit. They show no benefit, they show no harm, there was no effect either way. The course just seemed to continue. Mostly, actually, it was in patients with colon cancer where it didn't seem to have much benefit. Some other forms of cancer, though, in the other half of the patients, they showed that they either had transient stable disease, the disease stabilized for a period of time, or even for a prolonged period of time. So it showed a clear change in the expected course of their cancer by adding the intravenous vitamin C. Now, the authors of the paper, this was done in the oncology department of a large teaching hospital. So again, it's done by the oncologist. But their conclusions is that the present state of chemotherapy is unsatisfactory, as we saw from some of our other stuff. New cancer drugs continue to be developed and approved on the basis of marginal improvements in survival at unsustainably high financial costs. So that's our situation now, is we keep developing new cancer drugs at huge expense that give slight increases in survival. So it would seem more rational for cancer investigators to attempt to improve the effectiveness of well-known, inexpensive, generic cancer chemotherapies by studying their clinical interactions with antioxidants, especially vitamin C. So the thing is, let's use what we already have and get it to work better by adding some non-toxic treatments to it. And they also concluded that despite its biological and clinical plausibility, said we have a theoretical base, we have evidence that it's working, that it's helping, but it's still ignored by conventional cancer investigators and funding agencies. No one's interested. Actually, the same people who did that last study, there's just an interesting piece of data that they were looking at vitamin C deficiency in a teaching hospital in Canada. So they found that patients coming into the hospital, if they're coming in, so that 60% of them
were already had low vitamin C levels coming in. They're already deficient in vitamin C at the beginning. And it was no better after they were in the hospital for a while. So being in the hospital, eating hospital food didn't improve your vitamin C levels any. So you're already starting, not just that vitamin C is therapeutic, giving it is probably already, even treating a deficiency that you need in order for your body to deal with a lot of these stresses. We're going to go into some of the theory of cancer, and then look at how that will lead to how we can approach dealing with it. Now, first of all, the theory of cancer that we thought we knew for the last 60 years or so is probably wrong. So what we think cancer is probably not what it is. So I'm just going to go through some of the other research around this. First of all, this is just an interesting paper, but it shows a lot of key points. Because when they looked at cancer, and they looked at the way cancer was behaving, they said cancer behaves a lot like a wound. So when you have a wound and you're healing the wound, it turns on a lot of the same mechanisms that we see expressed in cancer cells. So this particular researcher said, well, cancer looks like a wound that doesn't heal. So a normal wound, you get a wound, it turns on all these things for turning up cell division, growing blood vessels, all the stuff you need to repair the wound that the cancer is doing. But once the wound is healed, it shuts down, and now it's done. Then in cancer, it just doesn't shut down. It just keeps on going. So there's no wound to heal, but it just keeps on acting as if there is. These are just some of the things that we know affect cancer growth. So we know that if you have free radicals, oxidative stress, it'll promote cancer growth. Inflammation is another promoter. If your immune system is not monitoring and controlling the cancer, it allows it to grow. Glycemia, blood sugar itself. Both the high blood sugar and the high insulin, which is type 2 diabetes, will promote the growth of cancer. And stress hormones, high cortisol levels especially, will have an immune suppression effect and also can increase inflammation long term. This is a nice simple slide. What it's telling us is different mechanisms of how natural substances are working on the cancer, both in terms of right at the genetic level, at the products of genes, that we have a fair bit of information already. Now, what's interesting too about the slide is that, first of all, you'll see the same thing operating in multiple mechanisms. So you have stuff like curcumin, or you'll have the green tea extracts. You'll have genesine. You'll have various of these food extracts that are operating on a variety of different gene expressions. Not only that, but you have many different things that are acting on the same thing. Now, this is one of the reasons why we get to synergism. So that if you're combining several things, again, that are working on, first of all, multiple different pathways, and they're reinforcing each other on some of the same pathways, then in general you can get to a much stronger effect. So, and again, these are substances that are affecting pretty much all of the mechanisms that we see in cancer, on cell growth, on differentiation, on apoptosis, inflammation. All these factors that are involved in cancer can be affected by a lot of these substances that we would naturally get in foods. This is just another way of sort of organizing the information. That again, the way cancer behaves is that there's genetic instability, which means that it allows for mutations to take place easy. There's abnormal expression of genes, like in the wound healing stuff, it's turning on certain genes. They're not necessarily mutations, they're just genes that are there that are being activated. There's abnormal signal transduction, cell-to-cell communication, angiogenesis. invasion and metastasis, immune evasion. These are all characteristics of cancer. And when we're looking at how to treat it, that we want to see how many of those things we can address. How many of those characteristics of cancer can we go after? Okay, now here we're going into the theory of cancer. So if we just right up until now, and still now, the predominant theory of cancer is that cancer is a series of mutations, series of damage to our genes, and after a certain number of them, we create what we call our oncogenes, and now we have cancer cells. So the genetic mutation theory has been the foundation, for cancer. And in fact, most people just talk about it as if it was a fact, not even a theory anymore. But here we have some stuff that's challenging it. So 10 years ago, back in 2006, they started what they called the Cancer Genome Project. And there was a lot of excitement at that time, 10 years ago. And the Cancer Genome Project means that we have now the technology where we can take a cell, we can map out all the genes in the cell pretty quickly. And their strategy is they're going to take all kinds of cancer cells, they're going to map out all the genes, so they're going to see which mutations are connected to which kind of cancer, and then we're going to design our new drugs to go after those mutations, and we're going to be done with cancer. That'll be the end of cancer. Now we have the technology. So that was 10 years ago. And in fact, there were some heads of major cancer hospitals in the States. At the time, they were even coming out publicly saying, once we get this project going and we get all this information, all these treatments we're using now, the chemotherapy, radiation, these are going to be relics of the past. They're going to be history. We won't even believe that we ever did this to people. So that was the excitement 10 years ago. So they actually, in the project, they actually discovered something like 10 million cancer-related mutations. But their conclusion is they could find no pattern for anything. They said most of the mutations formed a bewildering hodgepodge of genetic oddities with little commonality between tumors. So they really couldn't find any pattern of, this mutation is connected to this cancer. It was all over the place. Maybe even somewhat worse for the theory is they found cancer cells, like aggressive cancer cells, that had none of the mutations that they thought were essential to be cancer. They weren't there. And then they also found that cancers are quickly become resistant to different treatments by activating different genes to bypass whatever process is being blocked. So now you have a targeted therapy to go after this function, and it works for a little while, and very quickly it just finds a way around it. Now what happened though is that as this theory was starting to become a lot more shaky, they started going back to an old theory from Otto Warburg. He actually started his research back in the 1930s, and he had a couple of Nobel Prizes. It was considered the cutting edge stuff. And back in the 1930s, Warburg said he found something that was the same about every cancer cell. Didn't matter where it came from. There was only one quality, he said, was the same in every cancer cell. And what we refer to as the metabolism or the respiration. So a normal cell, if we go back, a normal cell will take some glucose, combine it with oxygen in oxidative phosphorylation, and make lots of energy, lots of ATP. So the cancer cells weren't doing that. The cancer cells were doing something different. They were using glycolysis. So they were using the glucose in the absence of oxygen, even if there was oxygen available. And that is not a great way of getting energy. It produces very little ATP with glycolysis. The oxidative phosphorylation produces lots more. So even at that point, he was saying, well, why would a cell do this? Why would a cell switch to a metabolism that was generating energy so inefficiently? And his conclusion then was, which was logical, well, it probably is doing it because it doesn't have a choice. That the normal mechanism is damaged, So it's going to the fallback, which is glycolysis. And he said this was, he called it the metabolic signature of cancer cells. It's still used that way. I mean, pretty much everyone refers to the Warburg effect. They say, well, that's what cancer cells do. You know, they make this shift in respiration. He wasn't saying that's what cancer cells do. He says that's what cancer cells are. Once you get this shift in metabolism, they become cancer. Now, once the discovery of DNA and the structure and everything else, people got much more attracted to the gene theory, the genetic damage, and this was largely pushed to the side and not paid much attention to. But there was research going on quietly. This was a paper in 2010, which later became a whole textbook a couple of years later, called the Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. So here he did a review of all the research, the basic research, clinical research, and the conclusion was emerging evidence indicates that impaired cellular metabolism is a defining characteristic of nearly all cancers, regardless of cell origin. The general hypothesis that genomic instability and essentially all hallmarks of cancer, including aerobic glycolysis, can be linked to impaired mitochondrial function and energy metabolism. So again, we're looking at, all of the qualities of cancer resulting, from this damage to the normal respiration. Now here was another angle that was going on with this research. And also because, as technology improved, you could start rearranging cells. So you can take a piece of one cell, put it into another cell. So this was largely unnoticed research that was going on. So, and it was done at 2 different universities in the States. So here they took the nucleus from a cancer cell, so presumably the nucleus from the cancer cell containing all the mutations, all the oncogenes, and they put it into the cytoplasm of a normal healthy cell. And it started behaving like a normal cell. Again, it had all the mutations, but it didn't act like a cancer cell. The study was then repeated, and this time even more carefully. There was other things that the confounding factors that maybe affected the results. So they tried to make it even more controlled, but they got the same result. And then they did the opposite. So here they took the nucleus from a normal cell, healthy genes, no mutations, and they put it into the cytoplasm of a cancer cell. And it behaved like a cancer cell. So it seemed that there was something else deciding whether it was going to be cancer that had nothing to do with the genes. And this comes down to looking at, so what is that? And it seems like right now the main culprit is probably the mitochondria. Again, where normal respiration takes place. So it looks like when there's damage to the mitochondria, it actually will send signals to the nucleus and will activate certain genes. And these are like distress signals, and this kind of goes back to the wound, this chronic wound type of thing. They're distress signals from a damaged cell that are activating genes that are actually associated with cancer. So it seems that these damaged mitochondria are this, if you want, the initiator of the process. And then that also initiates, because the mitochondria are damaged and they can't do their normal work, they start activating the glycolysis pathway too, and they start turning that up. By the way, I mean, with glycolysis, because cancer cells do that, they need something like 20 times more glucose to get their energy needs met, because it's it's the inefficient way of getting energy. But that's also the basis of what the PET CT is now. That's why we can do a PET CT, is that a PET CT you're giving radioactive glucose. And the radioactive glucose, again, is being taken up at least 20 times more by the cancer cells, and then they light up where the cancer is. So even the reason we can do a PET CT is because of this shift that takes place in the cancer metabolism. So So again, all of these signals that we associate with cancer, the increased proliferation, progression, metastasis, resistance to apoptosis, to normal cell death, all of these are signals that are coming from the mitochondria. This was just an interesting theoretical paper where they're talking about another popular theory coming out now, which is the cancer stem cell theory. And again, the other one being the metabolic, the Warburg effect. And these people just showing that they're really both describing the same thing. That the cancer stem cell theory, because looking at cancers as having stem cells that initiate the cancer. And the stem cells seem to be the ones that will also spread the cancer. There's a lot of cells in a tumor that can't spread. They can't start a new tumor somewhere else. Seems to be only the stem cells. Cancer has their own stem cells that initiate it. And what's also important about this whole stem cell theory is that conventional treatments like chemotherapy, radiation, don't kill the stem cells. And that's thought to be largely why with a lot of cancers you'll see an initial response. The cancer goes down because you're killing off the other parts of the cancer, but still leaving the stem cells, and then they just start up the cancer again. But when a cell becomes more stem-like, it also is more undifferentiated, which is what you see with cancer. And as a cell is more undifferentiated, it shows more of the features of Warburg type of metabolism. It starts using glycolysis more. It starts activating more of these pathways that are involved in growth and cell division and angiogenesis. So the actual nature of a cancer stem cell overlaps a lot with this metabolic pattern that you see in cancer cells. They're saying we're really looking at the same thing, and they're just looking at it from different angles. But it also is looking at, in the future, if we really want to be able to deal with cancer, we have to get at this origin, at the source of it, whether it's the metabolism or the stem nature of it. I should have cut off a little bit there. Here, is there a role for carbohydrate restriction in the treatment and prevention of cancer? So this is taking this theory and looking at how could you start applying it. Because right now we're saying, well, cancer cells are dependent on large amounts of glucose. So if they need large amounts of glucose for their energy needs, one thing you can do is restrict their energy source, which is the glucose. So here they're seeing that by restricting it, can you affect the growth of the cancer? And we find that both high insulin and IGF-1 levels, these are two hormones that are responsive to high carbohydrates, are also growth factors. And there's receptors on the cancer cells for these. So not only when you have a high carbohydrate diet are you providing food for the cancer, you're also stimulating these hormones which will stimulate the growth of the cancer. So it's a negative effect in two different directions. So what's getting used a lot now is what's being referred to as the ketogenic diet. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. The ketogenic diet actually started 100 years ago. Not for cancer, it originally was started for treating epilepsy, for seizures. Because they found that if you reduced carbohydrates to very low levels, what your body will do is to start converting fats into ketones to replace as a substitute for the glucose. And most of our cells in our body are very happy to use ketones in place of glucose. But they found this had all kinds of other effects in terms of reducing reducing oxidative stress, and it had good effects for seizures. Once all the anti-seizure drugs started coming out, it kind of got ignored, but then it came back again. More recently, actually from Johns Hopkins, they started working with kids who were very resistant to all the drugs for seizures, and they brought back the diet and started seeing some good responses. But once the diet was back, then they started using it for other purposes. So they started testing it for cancer. Now the reason that it works too is that ketones, although they're a good energy source for most of our cells, they can only be used in the mitochondria, which are not working right in the cancer cells, so the cancer can't make use of the ketones the same way. So here you're providing food for our healthy cells and not for the cancer. And now there are ongoing clinical trials right now, using it by itself, using it in combinations with hyperbaric oxygen, with other chemotherapies, and to look at how can you take this metabolic aspect of the cancer and get some effect from it.
Man, what does it mean? What should we eat?
Well, again, the ketogenic diet basically is low carbohydrate, high fat.
High fat.
High fat. Yeah, that's what you need to make the ketones out of.
Atkins.
Mm-hmm.
Atkins diet.
It's not the Atkins exactly. The Atkins is a kind of ketogenic diet, but it's not the ketogenic diet that we would use for cancer. Mainly because the Atkins is very low carbohydrate, but it's also very high protein. And you don't necessarily want really high protein for cancer, partly because there is one other thing that cancer cells can use aside from glucose, which is glutamine. They can use it very similar to glucose. And if you're having a very high protein diet, you're also getting a lot of glutamine, which the cancer can be quite happy with to use in place of glucose. So for a ketogenic diet for cancer, you specifically want high fat and low carbohydrate. It's not an easy diet to do, especially with the way a lot of the mass-produced foods are basically the opposite. They're very high carbohydrate, low fat. So it's a difficult diet to do, and people have to really be committed to stay with it. Now, based on the same theory, though, there are some drugs that have been looked at that can affect the metabolism of the cancer cells. One of them that's looking promising, that there's still a lot of work in how to use it, but there's a molecule that they've discovered called 3-bromopyruvate. They didn't just discover this, they were looking for it. So again, the university where they were doing a lot of research with this metabolic theory was Johns Hopkins. And one of the researchers, again, they were looking for how can we interfere with glycolysis and interfere with the ability of the cancer to eat. So 5-bromopyruvate they found was a very powerful inhibitor of an important glycolysis enzyme, which is hexokinase 2. Since then, they found that it even inhibits other enzymes, not just that one. But they found it was a very powerful blocker of that enzyme. They did their animal testing with it, and they took 19 rats with advanced cancers. They gave them the 3-bromopyruvate, and they showed it disappeared in 100% of the animals, which is pretty good for something that also has no toxicity, essentially. They're trying to do clinical trials with this. And like a lot of these kind of things, it's very hard to get funding for it. So it's a little bit in limbo right now. Apparently there is one clinic in the United States that's been given approval to actually use it as a cancer treatment, as an investigational treatment. So it's not approved as a treatment, but it's at least approved as to use it investigationally. There's one interesting case study that was done with this, where there was a teenage boy in Europe who had a primary liver cancer, and he was now at a terminal state. 95% of his liver was already replaced by cancer, and he was bedridden at this point. He couldn't really do much of anything, and the parents, like a lot of parents, were looking for anything they could find to help. And they came across this research, and they actually contacted the researchers to say, can you come and give it to my son? So the researchers said, we'll do it. You just have to get approval from your hospital. So they did go to the hospital, and it seems like after a month of taking it up in meetings, they finally said okay. And they came and they gave it, but they gave it directly into the artery going into the liver. So they're putting it right into the cancer, basically. What they showed here is that they actually, the cancer completely cleared in the liver. Unfortunately, the story didn't end so nice, but the kid actually got out of bed. He went on a tour of the United States to do talks about this. He was actually recovered, but he didn't have much liver left. Again, still most of his liver was destroyed. And apparently, from what I understand, he finally went back home and he got a little lung infection, a little bronchitis or something. They gave him an antibiotic that gets metabolized through the liver, and they apparently wiped out what was left of his liver. So he actually was cured of cancer but died. But it was just a case showing that by disrupting the metabolism of the cancer, you could have a very powerful effect on it. There was another case report, I don't have it here. They did another one in Egypt of somebody with a terminal melanoma. And it was very well documented, and it's been published. And here they gave him intravenous bromopyruvate. They just put it right into the vein. It's not an easy treatment to do intravenously. It's very irritating. It hurts. Doesn't hurt. Doesn't cause damage, but it hurts. But they did this with them, and they were just measuring his LDH as a marker. And I think it was after about it was 15, 20 IVs of the bromopyruvate. I think his LDH went from something like 4,000 to about 30. So it went down to normal from very high levels. So again, it's just another case. So what you're really looking for, though, is how can you put this into a real clinical trial and really get the dosing and administration and really fine-tune it. But right now, it's just kind of hanging in limbo. This one actually was a nice clinical trial based on the same theory. I didn't know about this group actually until they published this paper, but apparently there was a group in France that's been working with this theory for years now. And at one point they found 27 different compounds that were known to interfere with glycolysis. And then they narrowed it down to 7 that they thought were working better. Then they started using them 2 at a time. And then they found a pair that they thought was a good combination. And then they ran a clinical trial. They actually ran a formal clinical trial. And they took 40 terminal patients. Again, these were people after all their conventional treatment, nothing's working. They were given 2 to 6 months to live. And then they treated them with these 2 substances, which actually turned out to be 2 supplements that have already been on the market for years. They're just easily available supplements, which were alpha-lipoic acid and hydroxycitrate. Alpha-lipoic acid is a common, often used as an antioxidant, has many other uses, but they found it was also blocking one of the enzymes in glycolysis nicely. And hydroxycitrate, which some people know from Garcinia, it's an extract from a fruit. And it's been on the market because it's been used to help with weight loss. So it's been a weight loss supplement for many years. And they found that blocked another enzyme in glycolysis. So they put the 2 together, and they added another aspect to it they called low-dose naltrexone, which is something else. And then they looked at the results of this. And the results is that they either gave them this metabolic treatment, the supplements, or they gave half of them together with a chemotherapy or hormone treatment, some other conventional treatment together with it. And after a year, when again they expected no one to be alive, according to the prognosis, they found 68% of the ones who were only using the metabolic treatment were still alive, and 70%, about the same, of the ones using both the metabolic therapy plus some other conventional treatment were still alive. And there was essentially no side effects because these were just a couple of natural substances that are not toxic. So this is one other application and seeing how do we start putting some of this theory into use. Okay, now I'm just going to run through a bunch of other, that complicated slide of how the different substances are operating against cancer. Now we're going to break it down a little bit more. So, the hallmarks of cancer, this is kind of the universally accepted, if you want, description of what cancer is, how it behaves. So cancer is something that has self-sufficiency in growth signals, insensitivity to growth inhibitory signals, evasion of apoptosis, limitless replicative potential, they're immortal, they keep going, angiogenesis, tumor invasion and metastasis. And again, all of these things can be described as resulting from mitochondrial damage. So if we go through each of these now, if you look at so genetic damage and instability, this is again a characteristic of cancer. That make it more easy for mutations to rapidly occur in cancer cells. Again, not as the cause of the cancer, but as the result. But now they found hundreds or even thousands of compounds, mostly antioxidant type compounds, that help to protect the DNA from damage. And these include things like vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, zinc, other bioflavonoids, like curcumin, EGCG, which is green tea, resveratrol, which you can get from grape skins, and other antioxidants like alpha-lipoic acid and acetylcysteine. And this abnormal expression of genes, this turning on of oncogenes, and suppressing or interfering with cancer suppressor genes. Again, there are natural substances that can affect that whole process of gene expression. So turning on and off of the appropriate genes can help be regulated by vitamin C, vitamin E, melatonin, vitamin D, curcumin, green tea, genistein, which often you'll get from soy, resveratrol, selenium, quercetin. So again, a whole range of natural substances that have already been identified to affect gene expression. Signal transduction. So this is, chemical messages that give signals to cells to regulate their growth. So again, there's a lot of these growth pathways in cancer cells that are turned up. And the cancer cells can even secrete the chemicals that tell it to increase its own growth pathways. But there's things that can help reduce that. So again, we found that certain food extracts like boswellia, curcumin again, EPA, DHA, the omega-3 fish oils, various flavonoids, garlic, melatonin, parfenolide, which is commonly used for migraines, resveratrol, vitamin E. Another aspect of cancer is what they call cell-to-cell communication, which has to do with why, at least part of why cancer cells don't turn off this wound healing process. So again, normally when a wound is healing, once it's healed, there's signals from surrounding cells to say, okay, we can stop that. So cancer cells don't listen to them. They don't listen to the signals that tell them to stop. But there's things that can kind of promote some signals getting through. And some of these things are vitamin A, again, green tea, some soy extracts, melatonin, resveratrol, selenium, vitamin D. Okay, so we still have these things that are going to help go after that aspect. And again, probably, I guess, what is the most dangerous aspect of cancer is the evasion of metastasis. That's how it kills people. And cancer cells spread, they don't just move. They actually, there's mechanisms that they use, including secreting enzymes to break down collagen in tissues so that they can start moving through tissues. And there are things that can interfere with that. So we have stuff, again, like boswellia, gotu-kola, other pro-anthocyanidins, other things that come from, like from grapes and other berries. resveratrol, vitamin C, vitamin A, curcumin, again, green. Again, you're seeing a lot of things recurring in these different aspects of the cancer. And then in terms of just inhibiting the migration, the movement of the cells, again, we're back to vitamin D, omega-3s, melatonin, ginseng is another one that seems to have good effect there. And another part of it is the immune system. So one of the ways cancer can function is because it can hide from the immune system. The immune system can't find it, can't get it. So the things that they can, in some ways, enhance the ability of the immune system to function, and also maybe decrease the ability of the cancer to hide from the immune system. And some of these things are the mushrooms that have been studied a fair bit, especially things like shiitake, maitake, but it's probably almost all the mushrooms have different good effects there. Certain minerals like zinc, selenium, glutathione, vitamin C, melatonin, and there's certain enzymes like bromelain and especially pancreatic enzymes, proteolytic enzymes, that seem to have some very good anti-cancer effects there. And also the blood sugar and insulin regulation. Again, the cancer cells, again, are dependent on high levels of glucose. And there is some statistics that showing diabetics are more prone to breast cancer, prostate, colon, liver, pancreas. So being in this state of high blood sugar and high insulin will also make you more prone to developing cancer. So the other aspect is helping to try to control this whole blood sugar regulation. Partly that's the ketogenic diet, where it can have a very strong effect. But there's other things that can help regulate blood sugar too, including vitamin D, another plant extract called berberine, cinnamon, chromium, another plant coffee berry extract, and another herb, holy basil. All of these things can help regulate blood sugar, so that again we're trying to reduce the food supply for the cancer. And if we just try putting a lot of this stuff together, so if we're looking at developing like a sample plan for a patient that comes in with cancer, we want to cover a lot of these bases as much as we can. So you want to get good levels of vitamin D, at least 5,000. A lot of patients will be on more than that. Vitamin A, vitamin K2, which also is looking very important as a partner with vitamin D and its anti-cancer effects. Vitamin K2 also looks important because even the theoretical toxicity of vitamin D can largely be prevented if you have K2. So K2 will allow you to use even more vitamin D, and it has some of its own anti-cancer effects directly. Vitamin E, and especially not just if you want the regular vitamin E, the alpha tocopherol, but your vitamin E has 8 components. There's like 8 different forms of vitamin E. There's 4 tocopherols, 4 tocotrienols. These other tocotrienols that have been not paid much attention to, but some of them seem to have some very powerful anti-cancer effects, and they're worth supplementing. Again, the omega-3s, the fish oil, to get your DHA, EPA. Again, if we want to try some of the food extracts like curcumin, green tea, resveratrol, berberine. Again, these are all of them have multiple anti-cancer mechanisms, and again, a synergy between them is going to be much more effective. And then there's certain foods, things like Brazil nuts, which are very high in selenium, broccoli sprouts. There's another really nice anti-cancer supplement, which is sulforaphane, which you can buy as capsules. But it comes very high in the cruciferous vegetables, broccoli and cauliflower, in this whole group, but even more concentrated in the sprouts. So the broccoli sprouts can be a very good source of concentrated sulforaphane, again, which is recognized to have a lot of nice anti-cancer effects. And then with, again, the whole metabolic theory, to see if we can go after that, which is really going after the Achilles heel, the vulnerable point in the cancer. And there we have the ketogenic diet. They tested it again with hyperbaric oxygen that showed that it was enhancing the effect. It didn't seem that the hyperbaric oxygen was working by itself, but it did seem to increase the effect of the ketogenic diet. And then the other supplements, like they did in the study, alpha-lipoic acid, hydroxycitrate. I think we skipped over it. There's another one, I skipped this one, another one called dichloroacetate. This is another one that's been studied to a certain degree. It's, dichloroacetate actually came out as a drug a number of years ago to treat a specific genetic metabolic defect in children. So again, it actually came out because it affects metabolism, it affects carbohydrate metabolism. And it inhibits specifically this enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase. And what it seems to do is interfere with glycolysis, but actually promote the oxidative phosphorylation, the opposite of what happens in cancer cells. So it's kind of reversing the metabolism of cancer cells. Now it started getting used, actually investigated as a cancer treatment at a university in Canada. And they did the same thing. They tested on animals, showed that it was having good anti-cancer effect. They had some case studies. They did a couple of small clinical trials with it, showing that it was adding to the effectiveness of the cancer treatments. But this is, it's an orphan drug, which means that it doesn't really belong to anybody. And no one is really interested in funding any larger clinical trials with it, although it's, again, it looks like it has the potential to be another piece of this sort of metabolic treatment of cancer. So again, some of these things are easily available, like the alpha-lipoic and hydroxycitrate. Phenylbutyrate is another substance we produce in our body that also seems to be have a role in this whole metabolism of cancer cells. It is a supplement that's on the market, but very difficult to get. There's like mainly one company in the world that produces it. Okay, and again, this is just the basic summary. When we're going after cancer, you want to affect as many of those cancer-promoting factors as you can. And the more that you can do at the same time, the more directions you can go at it at the same time, in general, the better the result's going to be. So we want to use the aspect of synergism, combinations of supplements. And then the other aspect that we're looking at with nutritional treatments is even just protecting organs from the conventional treatments. There's a lot of people who can't even go through a full course of chemotherapy because they have so much organ damage, so much damage to liver, kidneys, nerves, that they can't even complete the treatment. You find that even if you have some of these protective things, you'll dramatically reduce the organ damage, and it'll even allow them to finish a conventional treatment. Okay, so this is all obvious?
Any questions? Mel, I would like to, maybe you can say something about, food as sources to some of the things you mentioned.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff is coming down to also some basic principles, even in terms of diet. And two main things. One is to not poison yourself, and promote damage in the body. And again, in our food supply now, we have a number of things, including a lot of the pesticides and the toxins that are used on the food. These can also be toxic in the body. And some of the things we deliberately add to the foods. There's stuff like monosodium glutamate, aspartame. These are really common additives in food. And these are toxic. Aspartame, even before it was put on the market, was shown to be causing tumors in animals. We still put it on the market, but we know that these things can be quite toxic in the body. So in terms of cleaning up the diet, of removing as much of the poisons as we can help a lot. And the other part is and again, that could mean trying to, as much as possible, going to organic food, unprocessed food that doesn't have all the additives to it. And then trying to get to more about the foods that are going to have high density nutrients to them. Now you have different parts of that. I mean, a lot of the fruits, vegetables, berries, these kind of things are very good in the antioxidants. So they're very good for protecting tissues and detoxifying the body. They're not necessarily so nutrient dense in terms of vitamins and minerals. And for the vitamins and minerals, a lot of times you're needing to add some of the animal products. If you have like healthy eggs, again, hopefully non-toxic eggs, they're going to be very dense in nutrients. If you can actually find some healthy meat, it's actually very good, although it's been accused of being promoting cancer. It's not really true. If it's full of toxins, it is. So if you have, if you're going to eat meat that's full of antibiotics, hormones, pesticides, it's not going to be good for you. But if you actually get clean stuff, there's some really interesting anti-cancer fats. It's very dense in minerals. It can actually be a very good food source. Fish, I mean, again, that's still one of our best ways to get the omega-3s naturally. And again, a lot of the nuts and seeds. There's issues with a lot of the nuts and seeds and other plant sources in terms of the nutritional content. Because the soils are getting so depleted, we're losing the nutrients. They've estimated, things like magnesium, selenium, some of these really important anti-cancer minerals have gone down 50, 80% in the same foods. And this is farming methods that are doing it. In a way, it got even worse because they're also finding with the most popular pesticide, which is glyphosate or Roundup, not only again can it be toxic, but they find it also binds minerals. So even what little minerals are left in the food, we're losing some of those with the pesticides too. And in general, if you can get organic, it is better. First of all, it doesn't have the pesticides. And second of all, if it's being done right, I mean, actually following your rules of organic, it means they have to put composting back in the ground, which replaces the minerals, so they tend to be, again, higher density nutrients to them. Again, I think, I guess some of the question, though, is just whether everyone's following the rules or not. But I think you're still better off. I mean, the more we can do organic, I think we're still one step ahead.
I know you mentioned before the Brazil nuts as a source for...
Well, especially with selenium. Again, selenium is a really critical anti-cancer mineral.
Right. So some examples like this, do you have some more? Like you mentioned sulforaphane.
Sulforaphane, again, is in these cruciferous vegetables, the broccoli, cauliflower, spinach, this whole group. For minerals, again, nuts and seeds are actually used to be very good. Again, if you can still get like organically grown stuff, you can get some good minerals. That's a place though where a lot of times you need to get some of the animal products. Because they are, not only is there usually they're more concentrated there, sometimes there's an issue separating minerals from the foods. They're more bound and it's harder to get them out. Whereas in the animal products, it's much easier to separate out the minerals. So there's like I said, if you can get organic vegetables and minerals and nuts and seeds, and that the other place actually that's quite good is in the sea vegetables, the sotium. Now, if you can get it without the radiation from Japan, it's much better. But it's actually a very good source of minerals, including iodine, which is very hard to get from other sources. And yod actually there seems to be connections with that to both breast cancer and prostate cancer, these hormone-related cancers. And I said our food supply in general is terrible with it. I mean, they estimate, I think in Japan, they're getting, I think it's like 100 times more, yod in their diets. And they have, quite very low levels of breast cancer, prostate cancer, these hormone cancers. So sushi can be good. Yeah. I mean, you can also go soak in yama milk. Actually, you'll absorb some minerals right through your skin. Okay, enough?
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.